Right, welcome to another seminar for the Scottish Society for Northern Studies. My name's Rebecca, I'm the events officer, and tonight we've got a talk from Dr. Rosemary Power on Sheila gigs in Scotland. Rosemary writes academically, mainly on Norse Gaelic relations in the Middle Ages, but also on folk traditions. The paper this evening will discuss Sheila's, together with the figure at Nulit. I'm sure you'll
Well, yeah.
correct there shortly, in the Western Highlands, which is today called a Sheila Gig, but appears to have originated as a very different figure. She'll be discussing interpretations of the original purpose of these figures, together with more recent views. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Rosemary. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to people for coming. And I started writing about this particular figure, which is on Iona Nunnery, publishing in 2012. And again in 2016, I published on a number of similar figures in County Clare in the west of Ireland. The figures I looked at also from a point of view of the founding of Iona Nunnery as a medieval historian. This figure I had walked by myself for 8 years without taking any particular notice of, and it's certainly not recorded at all by the generations of religious tourists who came to Iona, though it might have been covered in brambles or it might have been deemed unsuitable to be commented on to strangers, or it simply may have been as worn as this and nobody knew what it was, apart from it seems to have vaguely a human figure. So this was here. It was noted in 1894 in the Journal of the Royal Antiquarian Society of Ireland as a Sheila gig, and was photographed at the time, but unfortunately the slide has not survived, so we don't know how weathered it's become. It really would have become into the public eye only in 1837. I'm going to see if my slides will move. I'm not sure they will. Help.
Are you able to click back into the PowerPoint? Yeah, there you go. And if you click the button now,
Oh, this is a bit unfortunate. It's not
or
moving.
the arrow on your keyboard.
Yes, I've been doing the keyboard arrow. Ah,
Have you
that's
tried
slightly larger.
clicking?
Something's happening.
Hey, there we go.
All right. Thank you. This is it. On 1837, a new tarmac road was built to incorporate the church, the manse, and school on Iona. This went directly under this window of the nunnery, where it would have previously looked out onto fields and probably originally onto the nunnery's orchards and vegetable patch on the south side. As you see, it's not much to look at because it is worn, though we can see an arm, a head, and it seems to have originally been on some kind of triangular boss you see parts of behind. Enhanced, that figure came out, which is not unlike the next one I'll show. And those which are less weathered are fairly sexually explicit, so be aware in advance. This one from Bunratty Castle in County Clare, probably like the nunnery, sometime between the 12th and 15th century. She has teeth and is very distinctly in the form of a shinanigig, open legs, aggressive stance, usually no ears, no hair, and taking, but the arms are either before or behind the knees, but pulling apart the female genitals in what is quite a violent position usually. She was originally seen only by another anonymous person who recorded it in the same journal in 1941. At that stage, the figure seems to have been on the inside of a window embrasure up in the domestic quarters of the Bunratty Castle. It's now in the Great Hall and is part of a tourist attraction, with many interpretations being given. But its position up there at that window may have been relevant to the discussion tonight. There are numerous ones in Ireland, particularly in the southern part of Ireland, at least surviving. And of course, they are found in England, on the Welsh marshes, elsewhere, but very rarely in Scotland. They seem to have appeared in the mid-12th century. This is from the Nuns' Church at Clonmacnoise in Ireland. If the figure's unclear, you can see a human head with rather bulging cheeks and a straight mouth. The legs are actually up beside the eyes, and there she is exposing all on the chancel of Nuns' Church. So whatever they were, they had a place within female religious spaces, as well as we'll see, in churches, which were used by both sexes, and on later figures, particularly in Ireland, on castles. That is the Nuns' Church itself, Romanesque architecture, just before the Anglo-Norman arrival in Ireland, so native Romanesque, about half a mile from the main Clonmacnoise site on the River Shannon. This is also a County Clare one I put in. This is very small, only about 10 to 12 centimetres high. On a window embrasure, you can see a head with two ears on this occasion. She's rather charming. And there were originally two little lions licking the ears. Again, her arms are stretched out and you can see her legs at a jaunty angle. But again, she is naked and displaying on a window embrasure. Romsey Abbey in the far south of England has this one on the church near the nunnery, which was a royal female foundation. And here you see the abbess with her crook chasing you off, or something off, possibly not young men, as this is high on the tower. And of course, Kilpackham on the Welsh marches has a huge variety of delightfully carved figures. This one probably survived because of her engagement attributes and also because she was part of a whole series from this particular building. And Southall Cathedral Minster in central England has this figure, also very explicit, on the outside. So we find them both inside and outside churches. This one is again an Irish one, particularly violent. Again, teeth, big ears, but no hair. And again, here you see the arms are directly behind the legs and showing all. This is now in the Clare Museum, but is from a tower house, a small castle. She also seems to have a navel, which is unusual. And this one is the final one I'll show from County Clare, very faint to see. This is actually a figure. The head is at the top right. The arms you can just about see. The genital area seems to have been defaced, but there is a date decided of 1769. This is on a bridge across a canal built approximately at that date. And I'll come back to that as it was part of my theory. It was about the use of the bridge. And there you can see 1769. Coming back to the Iona one is, but positioning then is on inside or outside religious buildings. Some of them are very hidden, quite common, some well executed, quite a lot of them quite different. Several are not in their first situ. There are 13 in the bowels of the National Museum of Ireland, some of uncertain provenance. And while County Clare in Ireland has 8 or 9, Scotland, the entirety of Scotland has only 4 or 5, depending on how you count. So there are differences of how they look and what they are, but the naked female figure displaying her genitalia is a common feature, usually in an aggressive or an uncomfortable pose. Male images are rare and seem to face different reasons. But the female figures, given where they're positioned, must have been put up, presumably by male masons, but with the support of the entire community, and in some places, a female community. So they cannot be seen, obviously, as denigrating women, but neither would I argue are they seen as promoting women. This one on Iona was too warm for many features. The very fact it was there, though, was important. There are other carvings of women on Iona. That's from a distance. You can see the tarmac road. And this was actually a refectory window on the south side. Oh, this is one of the very rare green men in Scotland, apart from at Orkney Cathedral. It's also on the Iona Nunnery. You can see the out of the mouth, presumably a speaking regeneration of some kind, comes the foliage. Here you actually have a female figure on the spring on the right as you see it, but this is not a Sheila. Veiled woman with obvious breasts and at least one arm modestly on the outside, possibly on some bit of masonry holding her, and a figure, apparently a male figure in throes of death on the other side. These are what the pilgrims would have met as they came up to the south presbytery window of the abbey and then processed alongside of it, as both the estate map and the geophys and the positioning of in a chapel indicate. So there were other figures, so these are very specific ones. That's, of course, a 15th century window. So there, that one is. Where else are they in Scotland? Well, not many. This very aggressive one is inside St. Magnus's Cathedral in Orkney, possibly put there by the English masons who are thought to have worked on it. That has many green men, I think 6 in all, but this one, her positioning is unusual, and I'll come back to it. That is the sole, very loud, open mouth, and at least one arm clutching the head around the eyes as if to hide the eyesight from the figure rather than any onlooker. Oh, that one and this one gave me an understanding of what they were really about. There's no agreement on the names. You also get Hag of the Castle, the Idol, and there are very, very small reasons why any of these should be taken up. In terms of Ireland, they're not mentioned in the folklore collection, the National Folklore Collection, though it is true that the antiquaries in Ireland divided up physical remnants and the Folklore Commission on the folklore. So all we know is that no folklore about any of them was collected, and very little is known otherwise. They do seem to have some connection in certain places with pilgrim routes, in particular where they're found in France. And it's suggested that they came in the 12th century with the development of these pilgrim routes, at the same time to Scotland, possibly through the Normans and their builders, or indeed in Orkney from others. In all events, there are small numbers, but not that many. There are 3 main groups of theories about them. One is that they are a warning against the sin of lust. John Wycliffe in the 14th century England wrote against pilgrimage, particularly for women, seeing it caused all kinds of unseemly behavior. And indeed, lust was considered the most important of the deadly sins from a female perspective, avarice being that from male. But if this is indeed a warning against lust, where are the other 6 deadly sins? The feeder sins for the great ones, the direct death-dealing ones. That's murder, adultery. Oh, those are the main ones. The feeder saints, the deadly sins which lead to them are pride, anger, envy, lust, gluttony, avarice, and sloth. And the rest are missing. They're not carved with these ones. And if lust was originally one of a line of 7 where the idea came, it doesn't seem to have stopped there. Apart from the avarice for men, acidie, sloth, was the defining sin for those in religious life, and is not particularly noted either here. And it's also, if this is a warning against lust, who is being warned? Whether it is the chaste male to be frightened away, or the unchaste male to be warned, or indeed women, and how can we interpret it? Who is being warned? did they come around at the time when that Vatican edict on priestly celibacy was finally being established in Normandy and beyond, and indeed in Scotland? And what is the point of positioning a warning against lust if it cannot always be seen, either because it's too high or in a dark corner? We, of course, don't know how many wooden ones have not survived, or indeed, particularly in Scotland, how many stone ones have not. Another set of theories from the 1890s onwards has been that they are pagan survivals, fertility cuts, sex, and so on. Sex, of course, being the default position, rather like ritual is today for that which we don't understand. But the academics of the time dismissed these views as unlikely. And it is difficult to argue that any kind of pagan survival had lasted some 700 years and then re-emerged at this particular time and in these places. This group of views was revived in the 20th century, partly through the work of the folklorist and Egyptologist Margaret Murray, who was convinced that there was a hidden subculture which had survived from paganism, which worshipped a male fertility god. Her female was a partner of this fertility god, but over the course of the 20th century, the female figure as a goddess, an indeterminate goddess, has taken that position. That again is difficult to argue, though it has been argued quite cohesively by a number of people in the 1980s, but without coming to any conclusion and usually using a somewhat outdated form of academic work. So I don't think we're a goddess figure either. The developments of those have been a feminist icon, which is difficult given the contorted position, or childbirth, related to childbirth, which again, the positioning is not suitable for childbirth. And these may be modern readings for modern wishes. Medieval churches and figures of goddesses do not usually figure together. You'd much more likely have female saints clothed inside and probably coloured. This does arise quite a lot of ire if you're giving popular talks, as I often do on Iona or in the west of Ireland, over this, because it is a desire to see that particular role there. But again, it has not been argued cogently. The third one is that it has an apotropaic purpose, to frighten away that which is frightening and harmful by frightening away the cause of fear. And the earliest of the most recent books of scholarship, which is Anderson's 1977 book, A Witch on the Wall, as Jürgen Anderson, promotes this view and looks at it in a pan-European context. This one may seem to have more going for it in a general sense, and my own view has come out of that it is a specific kind of frightening. And the point of it being initially on churches was that it was to frighten away the devil himself, or itself, or herself. The argument came partly from this particular figure, which is faint in this, but is on the bridge over running water. And as we know from tradition, the devil cannot cross running water. So therefore, if you protect, and it is a running canal into the river, if you protect the bridge, the devil cannot use the bridge either. When I was developing this, I also discovered that actually the bridge from 1769 had been replaced in 1964, and this figure had come with the new bridge. I'll come back to this one, Orkney. The other one is this one, which is in Orkney. It's very damaged on the top of a pillar, probably by falling masonry. It is directly confronting the high altar, which seems incongruous in some ways. However, The argument here is that it is relating specifically to one particular liminal space. The high altar, of course, now the communion table in Orkney Cathedral, is of course where the Last Supper was reenacted. And the devil was present at the Last Supper because there, according to John's Gospel, the devil entered into Judas Iscariot. So therefore, the high altar is one of those places which needs protecting. And through a figure of this naked female displaying her vagina, you have the ultimate liminal area, the place from which birth occurs. Jesus in Christian theology is the incarnation who has become flesh, human body. The devil, being pure spirit, cannot go there, cannot become human. So therefore, it is a particularly frightening liminal space. So the scaring away of the devil with this most basic of apertures is the argument I've made for that one. But having said that, and may as well just look at some of the Scottish ones. This is one at Taynault, on the about 11 miles east of Oban in the West Highlands, to which I return because although it has some features which make given it the name of Sheela na gig, it is actually quite different from the others. Riddle on the Isle of, actually this is Isle of Lewis, isn't it, Riddle? Forgive you me for that. 13th century tower, way up is this figure, who is actually sideways on, but definitely female, with female breast, some kind of head covering, slightly unusually at a slight angle in one direction and with holding some kind of animal. It's not the only figure on the tower, of course. This figure is male and was apparently in better condition, but a woman with an aristocratic title and a gun took offense and shot at it in the early 20th century, I am told. So that's one. This one is coming down to St. Mungo's. This arch was originally thought to be outside because it is quite worn. And one of the many, is now at the entrance to the crypt. One of the many figures on it is this tiny figure. From the top, you can see very worn, the head bowing down, two legs that look like pegs at the bottom, possibly seated on something, and with the two arms coming down to the genital area. On some kind of shield, again, rather like Iona. This is one of the ones which is sometimes said, and this is where my notes fail me, because this is on the Russ of Marl at an abandoned and ruined church. This is a figure in very high relief, or on figures on a stone set into the wall. There may or may not be some kind of arm part of the way down, and there appears to be some kind of foot at the bottom and maybe a head. And that's what it looks like with another protruding stone beside it. All I can say about this is it was definitely something. But given the high relief, it seems to be more likely that it was a figure, perhaps a saint figure, which had become worn at some stage or even defaced deliberately. We have to consider how much Reformation differences between Ireland and Scotland have made these so much less common in Scotland. We don't know how many have been destroyed or have just worn away or become so worn they haven't been identified, or indeed those which were possibly made of wood. So it's difficult to argue anything from this one. This one is on the Isle of Egg. Although it's set upright, I would not be convinced that this is a Sheela na gig so much as possibly what had been a prone tombstone of a female figure, and it does seem to be female and clothed, lying on some kind of pillow. And while the hand area is somewhat worn, it's not at the genital area, it's on the lap. And if it's been worn, well, the habit at present in many VILs is to leave money in the crotch of the male figures, and possibly something similar happened for good luck or whatever reason with this one. This is actually on a piece of wood. It's now in Kilmartin Museum, and whether it's the work of two hands or just one is uncertain, and whether it was just a kind of doodle, which by one and then enhanced by the other, or whether it was deliberately something more, is difficult to say. It may just have been some boys doing a lewd carving, but it is difficult again to say because we have no context other than it came from Cowell. And there it is on a slightly closer look. From Kirk Newton and now south of Edinburgh and now in the National Museum is this tiny finial in wood. And this, of course, has got a naked woman, and there is obviously the opening of the vagina there. She doesn't seem to be tremendously upset, but the figure beside her is bearded, male, and is also engaged in the pulling. So it's not like any other. And one of her arms, her right arm, seems to be holding on to him. Oh no, yes, and he's got one arm behind her head, sort of hands round her neck. Apparently, the legs are intertwined underneath, so it's not well lighted. I just can't see this as one of these frightening ones. It looks to me something more to do with childbirth and marital responsibility. So that might be reading in the 20th century. That is the size of it. And so where we know where it came from, it's somewhat out of situ. Coming back to her, I said she is there in the Orkney Cathedral, as are Green Men and other carvings. But that is all. There is only the one there. The Taynault one may or may not be. I've so far mentioned four, which I think are Sheela gigs in Scotland. This one I'm publishing on this coming March in a week or so. And you see a figure, a head, very worn, no arms on each side of them. There is some sort of rather spindly arm coming out across part of the chest. No sense of any breasts, possibly striation, and the top of two legs. It would be locally now be called a Sheela gig, and somewhat oddly is placed on the 1829 Church of Scotland building in Taynault, though it seems to come from the medieval church directly a few feet beside it to the south. It's one of two figures there. But here you can see something which is not like any of the other figures, which is apart from the main head, where there may be eye sockets looking upwards, there is another head to the side, and that little arm seems to belong to that second head, which you see here on the right. All right, I'll come back to that one for a minute. The right side of this is completely worn away, and it presumably was quite badly worn when it was set into the wall, again, presumably in 1829. And on a rote which the minister would have had to walk from the nearby manse directly underneath it. So it was in his view and his family's view. Another figure is also on the side of that church, open mouth, very worn again, but medieval, with some kind of short haircut or something similar. The dedication of this church is now called McCairn Church at Taynault. In the 12th century, it became known as Kilspickerel, the church of the Bishop Harold. It was a significant pilgrim route church and was the original basis of the Diocese of Lismore. So the Bishop of Lismore would first have been here before moving to Lismore. It's not far away this is quite close, 2 kilometres to Loch Etive, and there out to Lismore is quite a simple sea journey. The earlier dedication is to an early Irish saint called Currer, or sometimes Kerald, or even Cyril in the 13th century. And the two names may have gone in together into Killis Vicar or the Church of the Bishop Harold Carroll. Um, Presumably, this is a survival of a head from the medieval church, and not being mitred as a figure of Bishop Harold would have been, this might have been more acceptable, certainly in the post Reformation period up to 1829, as the original founder saint of an earlier Christianity, which was deemed much purer than that of the High Middle Ages. So these are both on the south wall. This is a figure again, you see more clearly that there is this second face with an arm looking downwards. There is the top of a leg, it's not uncertain whose leg it is. So the main figure has another figure on its back. It doesn't seem to be diabolical. There's nothing to indicate that. In fact, in certain lights, it looks as if it's looking down quite lovingly. My suggestion is, given that it's a position on a pilgrim route and very close to water with Loch Etive, that this was in origin a St. Christopher figure. Leave aside the aperture, which I believe is later. The normal feature would have been Christopher, the ancient saint, the Christ bearer, usually depicted as the man of magnificent strength who was an early Christian convert and made it his role to carry pilgrims and other travelers across a swollen river, which he did marching out with his staff in his right hand and the person in question on his back. So one night, as he was in his hut, a figure came to the door. It was a small child who asked to be taken over the river. And Christopher thought this would be easy and girded himself up, took the child on his back, staff in hand, waded out into the river. And as he began to cross it, he found that his burden of the child got heavier and heavier. So he barely staggered to the opposite bank, where he discovered that this was Christ child, who had been bearing, hence his name Christopher, and that for Christ child was carrying the sins of the world. This is most popular in Jacobus de Voiragine's Golden Legend of the 14th century, but is widespread. Not particularly common in Scotland, but well known generally on pilgrim routes, and a suitable one to protect from uncertain sudden death on pilgrimage or other walking, and indeed death by water. So my suggestion of this was originally St. Christopher, presumably painted on the south arch to be seen by pilgrims either coming up from Loch Etive or down the side of Loch Etive towards the modern road goes into Oban, where there was a prostration cross of the early 16th century. That's a cross on a mound, parts now in the National Museum, which would have been the first site of the main church, the mother church of the area, this one, Tynalt, or well, the original medieval one, and would have been a time to bless and give praise, because that's where the sacrament was kept. If this was the origin, I suggest that while it was still on the medieval church and must have been after the Reformation, it was put to a different use, possibly freestanding. We don't know how much is lost behind, but it was used for a water spout to take water away as drainage from the roof of the guttering. This would have been obviously with some kind of piping, and the piping would have had to protrude to keep the water away from the foundations of the church. And so it would have retained its very masculine kind of figure with quite a bulging belly and no obvious breast or such like, and used for this purpose, and hence that particular opening, possibly where it was just the easiest place to put it, but probably with a degree of humour intended, or at least denigration of the knowledge or interest in saints and pilgrimages as occurred after the Reformation. In fact, in some lights, it looks as if a bit of piping is still left in it. It must, with the head of the other head I showed, it must have had some kind of interest or affection, because in 1829, when this church was built and opened, they were mortared on firmly into the wall of the church, where, of course, the piping would no longer have been necessary and was presumably snapped off. Um, so it looks today, it is considered to be a Sheela gig. That's it on the wall of this church with the medieval ruin in the background and Cruachan behind. So we have this one, very violent, very aggressive, with suggestion that again it is to do with the devil cannot pass. And of course, this one from Thénault. Whether those who put it up in this state either tried to plug the aperture or indeed were aware of Sheela gigs and thought it might be an extra protection against for the church, we don't know. The iron workers of Thénault were a fairly independent group of people, and may also have seen it as a way to assert themselves against the minister in this period of not long before the disruption. Of course, that is only one of many possibilities. So I think I've talked for nearly 40 minutes, so thank you very much for listening. Hope we haven't offended you with the images, and those are the 3 articles which I have done on these different ones. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. The images are fantastic and really, really, yeah, you're getting a lot of praise there from for. Yeah, anybody that has any questions for Rosemary, please pop them in the chat and I can read those out. I was certainly fascinated to hear your sort of discussion, your argument for placing these not to your to scare women, but to frighten the devil himself. And I wondered if there was sort of a cross purpose there, where was the devil more likely to want to appear in churches that were pilgrimage sites? Yeah, if you could speak to that a bit, I'd be interested to hear more as to why they would appear in churches in pilgrimage sites as opposed to your average church.
I think there is some basis in the possibility that the figure started as a frieze on the continent depicting the 7 deadly sins. And then this particular one, for some reason, hived off and took on a life of its own, both in Britain and Ireland, but doesn't never seems to be very common in Scotland. And the Scottish ones are all completely different. Um, women were the weaker vessel in the debate. Um, and of course, they were prone to lust. But the the figures do not incite lust as we would normally imagine it. They're more likely to repel,
Mm.
and so presumably had this element of diabolical repulsion, particularly this business of the devil being pure spirit, cannot enter into life, into human life. So those aspects would be there. Um, Particularly in Ireland, you get quite a lot of the later tower houses. They went on into the 17th century, sometimes over the door. So I think the repelling humans who might want to attack would have been part
Ah,
of it, as well as those. But also the one at Bunratty, up in the domestic quarters on the window. I think it sort of basically became something to do with keeping the fairies away, so they didn't steal
yeah.
your children.
Yeah, that sort of folk
Yeah.
afterlife of them
Yeah.
carrying on as well.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you again for such a fascinating talk. The info, if you could go back to that last slide, just in case anybody wants to take a screenshot of your upcoming publications, we'll certainly promote them on our
So,
channels as well.
oh well,
Yeah,
it's
there we go.
2012 in folklore, and then was
Sorry,
what?
your previous.
Yeah. So the other one's also in folklore
Great.
now.
Yes, two
Um, but
folklore.
yes.
Great.
So I don't know. I mean, they are repellent, but I can't see that every figure which involves a woman is a Sheela and a gig.
Mm.
Most of them are actually
Yeah,
not
there's a
in the gigs. They might be saints or, and some survived the Reformation. However,
yeah.
yes, it
And
was locally.